So apparently, I've built up a reputation for taking forever to get videos done. When the Classic Tetris channel posted the player profiles I made for everybody in the top 8 of the Classic Tetris World Championships this year, I got roasted in the comments for even being able to finish them. And I get it, it took me almost a year to finish the vlogumentary about the 2018 Tetris World Championships, and a year later I've only released the first part of the 2019 Tetris World Championship series. But there's a documentary about the Tetris World Championships that's taken much longer to come out. But it's finally on the verge of being released, which I find really cool because for years in most of the Tetris community, its existence seemed little more than an urban legend. So what's the backstory? Back in 2010, the first year of the tournament was originally a one-off event filmed for a documentary, Ecstasy of Order. And after the tournament's success, they decided to start doing it every year, and it eventually got pretty popular. And for new people getting into the scene who had watched the original documentary, the natural question was, would there ever be a sequel? On one of the players, Harry Hong's stream, there would occasionally be rumors that a sequel had already been filmed in 2014 but had never been released. And on another player, Jonas Neubauer's stream, one time he was analyzing photos from a Google image search of himself and said that this one was actually from that unreleased sequel. And when I first attended the World Championships in 2018, I asked the original producer of the first film, Vince Clemente, point blank, what happened to the second film? And he said, oh, there's actually a different person who's the main guy behind that one. That's Chris Higgins. So who is Chris Higgins? Well, if you've watched the Tetris World Championships, you've probably seen him a lot, but never quite noticed him too much, and probably wouldn't recognize him from this photo. He's been on the staff for the tournament since 2012, working as a referee and as a lead camera operator, which is fitting since his professional background is in the media industry. And in 2014, the tournament was entering its 5th year, so after being on the Tetris staff for a couple of times, he thought it would be really cool to document how things had changed and how the scene had grown. So he filmed the whole thing. All these shots are taken directly from a trailer for the documentary that was quietly released on Vimeo all the way back in 2015. And something that's really interesting about this in retrospect is that 2015 was the first year that the Classic Tetris channel actually started uploading videos of the tournament to YouTube, and they didn't actually have every single match being recorded and uploaded until 2018. For a long time, I had assumed that some centralized archive of all the previous tournaments existed in a vault somewhere, until I learned recently that no such archive exists. Several of the early years of the tournament now only exist in photos or patchwork portions of the Twitch live streams that individual people clipped and re-uploaded to YouTube on obscure channels. So this 2014 documentary is a special look into a year in the tournament that, until now, hadn't been known about by much of the community. But of course, the obvious question at this point is, why did it take so long to come out? Well, aside from Chris Higgins reportedly just being really busy with life in general, it boiled down to two main issues that had to do with his vision for the film. The first thing was the scope. This project, of course, was originally conceived as a feature-length film. The original documentary clocked in at 1 hour and 33 minutes. But apparently, after recording the stories of many of the competitors and how the weekend went in detail, he wound up with so much footage that he couldn't figure out how he wanted to structure the overall narrative, and was frustrated that he'd end up having to cut almost everything out. Now, that may seem like a silly problem on the surface, like the issue is just cutting stuff out, but on an emotional level, I totally get it. This was Chris's first feature-length film. This was his baby. He reportedly invested more than $20,000 of his own money into renting gear, hiring crew, and flying out to the locations of all these players, trying to retain creative control and not being beholden to a studio or an investor. And what he ended up with was a really big baby. You don't want to cut off the arms and legs of your baby. But the second issue, which might have even been the bigger one, was the footage of the games themselves. So as I've talked about in previous videos, NES Tetris doesn't look like what you see in the broadcasts nowadays. It's captured from an NES looking like this, and completely redesigned and post-processed into HD by a sharpening program Trey Harrison wrote in 2015 called Trey Vision. At a really rough level, the way the program works is by analyzing the most prominent color in the region where the squares are supposed to be. And the thing is that the settings have to be really finely calibrated in order to properly analyze the footage. If there's irregularities or glitches, the program doesn't work right. Some other NES Tetris streamers have also used sharpeners over the years, such as Joseph Saley in his first 1.3 million game, but his capture and calibration wasn't completely perfect, and so you can see little artifacts pop up occasionally. The worse the source footage gets, the more artifacts and glitches there are. And in the case of Chris Higgins' game footage, as he explains on the Piece Dependency podcast, it just didn't seem feasible at all.
So what I had in terms of like video of the games was I had an RCA output going through a USB like recorder that recorded a flash video file at 320 pixels by 240 pixels of each TV. That's what I had.
Yeah.
And I had talked to Trey right after he invented TreyVision and said, well, gee, can I run this footage through your system? And he gave it a shot and it didn't work. And the problem was the more popular YouTube got and the more people expected, like, this is what classic Tetris looks like, the more that just putting up two fuzzy standard def things next to each other wasn't going to cut it. You know, so in my movie, it was going to look terrible.
And as superficial of a problem as it may seem, I also totally get this one as well. There was a huge amount of time and expense put into making the rest of this film look really professional, something that could have been a theatrical release. But unfortunately, the really high quality of everything else just made the game footage look even worse by comparison. Chris didn't want to put out a version of the film that looks like this. And it's something I can relate to in a small way. When I was sitting down to try and make the video about the 2018 tournament, there were a lot of moments that I wanted to include that I didn't have any footage of. And I figured it would be boring to just watch my face talk about them with no visuals. So I figured I'd just draw some cartoons of everybody to illustrate the situations. But the problem was, I didn't really know how to draw. I thought my early test drawings were awful and that everyone was basically unrecognizable. And it took me a while to figure out a way to do them that I thought was at least somewhat acceptable. So anyways, with every passing year, Chris Higgins felt like he didn't have a solution to these problems. And it seemed like the film was just never gonna happen. But then this March, when everybody went into quarantine, two things changed. The first thing was that Chris contacted Trey one last time to see if anything could be done about the game footage. And because Trey was out of work for a little bit, he suddenly had a bunch of extra time to fiddle for a bunch of hours with the settings in TreyVision.
Within 4 or 5 hours, the first set of matches came back to me in TreyVision. And they had problems. So like he said, look, I upscaled your video, I ran it through this thing, and the recognizer has problems.
Yeah.
Like the blocks will sparkle, they'll change colors, blocks will disappear randomly because that's what's in the source footage. Like the video is not good enough to render everything perfectly. But he's like, here is a TreyVision copy of this match. Do you want me to do the next match? And I had to just like jump. I was like, oh, it's possible. Oh, yes, it's possible.
And Chris, who was also out of work, was able to spend months painstakingly fixing all the footage by hand to get it looking perfect. The second thing was that Chris was talking to the producer of this film and had an epiphany moment where he realized that online documentary miniseries are really popular right now, and that the footage he had would work much better if that were his vision. He didn't have to have one big baby that was an amputee. He could spread it out and have a bunch of little babies, have a whole family. Okay, this analogy is probably getting pretty weird, but hopefully you get the point. So then in order to finally finish the docuseries, he assembled a small crew for editing, music, narration, etc. that he'd been able to hire for kind of a shoestring budget of $4,000. And he created a Kickstarter in hopes of getting it funded, and, well, his expectations were completely blown out of the water. At the time of recording this, he's reached every single one of his stretch goals, which is going to allow him to do a lot more with the series than he ever thought possible. Today is the final day that the Kickstarter is live, and it's an opportunity not only to pre-order the series, but also sign up for a bunch of behind-the-scenes updates along the way that won't be available when the series is finished and for sale in 2021. And to make something clear, I wasn't sponsored in any way to make this video. I have no direct part in the project, but I was really thrilled to find out that it was finally being made. And I'm one of the backers, and I thought it would be really cool to share in case anybody watching didn't know about it or didn't know the full backstory. I think it's going to be a fascinating snapshot into what the scene looked like right before it went viral on YouTube and exploded in popularity, as well as highlighting some of the stories of well-known veterans like Terry, Yanni, Jeff, and many others. So I'll have a link in the description if you want to check it out. But now I've got to get back to finishing my own docuseries about the 2019 tournament, so I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.